Okay, so welcome everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to HITEC Live. Yay. I'm super excited for this session today. We have Hans Brown with us from BNY Mellon. He is the head of enterprise innovation and chief information officer for corporate technology at BNY Mellon. So welcome, Hans.
Thank you very much for having me here. Really looking forward to our session.
We're super excited. So just to give a little background about Hans, he is responsible for the firm's innovation partnership strategy, as well as Horizon 3 new business development, as driving the transformation of technology, supporting corporate functions of risk, legal, HR, and finance. A little bit about BNY Mellon. BNY Mellon is known as the Bank of Banks, guys, founded 236 years ago by Alexander Hamilton, and today helps clients manage and service their financial assets. So Hans today is going to walk us through BNY Mellon's digital transformation journey as they take a bit of a different path in respect to other institutions. And so they've been on this journey for several years now and are accelerating it through an open ecosystem that connects expertise with clients, partners, and other key stakeholders. So what's going to be special about this session, everyone, is that Hans absolutely loves disruption. So we can be as disruptive as possible during
Rowdy is good. Rowdy is good. And if you throw things at the screen, that helps too. You know, just kind of find your inner self. That always works well.
I love it. I love it. And so if anyone, during the discussion has a question, a comment, feel free to raise your hand or chime in. And this is an open conversation, so please feel welcome to do so. All right. Okay, so to get us started, Hans, we'd love to know a little bit about you and your background. We know that you're quite the global citizen, working in already 4 different continents, lived and worked in 4 different continents, except for South America. So we're gonna have to fix that.
I know.
So please tell us a little bit about yourself.
So thanks. So it's actually really funny. As you can tell from my accent, I'm not from around these parts. And I've lived and traveled. So I've actually lived and worked in Africa, in Europe, in Asia, and now in North America. But when I worked in Asia, I was actually responsible for South America. So I used to spend a lot of time in Brazil, working out there. But we have a rule in my family: we're not allowed to count a place unless we've lived there for more than 6 months. So it's a really hard, fast rule. Unless we live there for 6 months, we can't count it. So whilst I spent more than 6 months in total in Brazil, we didn't actually live there. I didn't have post delivered there, so we don't get to count it. So
close, so close.
Close. I know, it's like all these things, so close yet so far. And so it's kind of like a recount that's happening at the moment. So it's kind of, if I kind of think about, the way I've kind of approached all of my life and my career is, my family has been very transient, and that transient nature has kind of infected the work that I do. So most people are surprised when I say, this is the first time I've worked in finance. Up until I joined BNY Mellon, I never worked in finance. I graduated as an engineer. I'm an engineer. I like to build bridges. I like to build houses, skyscrapers. That was my calling. I left there to work for a defense company and a telecoms company, designing systems that basically did guidance systems for rockets and airplanes and so on. Had a really great time there. Then left to go and work for a consumer company. Most of you use their products. Canon, the camera company. My teams designed and built the first digital SLR, a huge chunk of brand new printer drivers, multifunctional devices. So kind of from defense, slow, ponderous, takes billions of dollars, very opaque, to fast-moving consumer goods, which is, I have no idea what I want to sell, but it's got to be ready by Christmas. It's got to cost $300, and it must meet some definition of attractive, and people want to buy it. And with really fast production cycles. Then left Canon to actually go and work for a data analytics company in the city of London. And they basically produced software that drove investment banking. But at heart, it was a software company. And that was my first foray into the fintech. That was my first foray into kind of something close to financial services. And then from there was hired into BNY Mellon in London, then later transferred to Asia, and then was transferred again to my current role in New York. So lots and lots of migration, and but huge amounts of fun.
Yeah, so it seems like not only do you jump continents, you also jump industries, basically.
Yeah. Now, the only advantage of this is, and I say this, every time I've been in South America, everybody mistakes me for a native. I have no idea why, but I can't tell you the number of times I walk down the street, people speak at me in either Spanish or Portuguese, and I have to smile politely and say, I'm still not from around here.
But I imagine like at least you've conquered that phrase, so you can at least say that one thing before.
Not even close. I've mastered beer, the ATM, the airport, and the hotel. That's kind of where we are at.
Right, Hans. Well, now that you're within the HITEC family, we're going to help you out on that aspect.
Thank you. Thank you. Much help.
Amazing. So why don't we jump into a little bit about the digital transformation journey that you're going to share with us today. Tell us about BNY Mellon's approach to digital transformation and maybe some of the milestones and lessons learned throughout that journey.
Okay, so when you kind of think about digital transformation, and it's actually really funny because everybody says they're on a digital transformation journey, but nobody quite knows where they're going to go. If I'm being really kind of candid, the approach we have in BNY Mellon is actually way more thoughtful than I think I've seen anywhere else. So the way we've kind of looked at it is our approach is there's two main approaches out there. What happens is, I call it the Silicon Valley approach. You go, you build some beautiful innovation center in the heart of the valley. It's got amazing chairs. It's got drones everywhere. It's got, amazing video walls. Everything's amazing. Huge amounts of press releases. You do lots of things, but nothing fundamentally changes the core of the organization. Stuff just happens around the peripheral, and the organization itself doesn't transform. The second model that we've seen happen is people they look at the bank or they look at the financial service organization and say, this bank or this organization is old. The people are old, the processes are old, everything's old. Let me go and build something new right off the side. So they go off and they build a new bank with new people, with new processes, with new tools, everything brand new. The downside is that never scales because in effect, it's something off to the side. You're not looking to change the core. Our approach has been kind of really, let's look at every process we have. Let's look at every product. Let's look at every interaction. Let's look at every service, and let's digitize that. And so the approach kind of looks at digitizing the core of what we do. What are our core processes? What are our core interactions? What are our core services? Digitizing that very core. That basically is really immediate, and the benefit you get is you improve the client experience and you take a huge chunk of cost out of the system. The second phase, the second aspect is reimagine the existing services that you have. And that is a reimagination from the client experience perspective. So looking at real human-centered design and designing around the end consumer of that particular product or service and creating that digital interface all the way through. Item number 2, that delivers increased revenue, and it also takes out an element of cost because you're basically improving the service that everybody's getting. That with that reimagination, you're transforming it. The third horizon looks at creating businesses and industries that we're not in at the moment now. And that is brand new things we're not doing right now. And then, in effect, launching off, speedboats or fast boats or whatever the common terminology is, but launching new businesses we're not enough now. And that obviously looks to bring you revenue in. Now, to do all of these three things, you need capability, you need capabilities that support them. So you need great functionality and client experience. You need innovation centers that have an ability to innovate. You need capability to do advanced digital solutions like AI, ML, blockchain, all of those things. You need real delivery capability. You need an ability to bring partnerships and source capability that doesn't exist in the bank and bring it into the bank. You need to bring all of those things, and you need great data, an ability to look, govern, and derive value from the data that you have. Bringing all those three things together, bringing all of those, so those 3 ways of looking at the world and the 6 capabilities that live under it, that in essence forms part of our digital organization, and it has representation across everything we do. So that's kind of like our beat. Now, in terms of lessons learned, one of the things I'll say is it can't happen in a vacuum. So I'm responsible for enterprise innovation, which is 3 of the capabilities and then 1 of the horizons. And the one thing I'll say is innovation has to happen everywhere. Innovation is not the responsibility of a select group of people who get locked in a fluffy room with bouncy chairs and all of those things. Innovation has to happen everywhere. We can't build everything. There's capability, there's things that we're really good at, and there's stuff that we can get from outside. And then we have great partnerships that bring in, and we announce lots of these partnerships. And so it's the whole, moving the whole organization, designing that organization around the client, designing it around the outcome the client's looking for, and really keeping the client front and center in terms of what we do. Very long-winded answer, but hopefully that kind of got it across in one.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a follow-up question to that, but before I jump in with my question, I do want to throw it out to the group. Does anyone have like a question or a comment around what Hans just shared with us?
And it's Friday afternoon, don't be shy.
Hi, Hans, this is Melissa. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks, Melissa.
I'm also BNY Mellon proud, so thank you.
I noticed.
I've been with the bank now for a year and a half, and I can honestly say I'm very proud. What do you consider, where do you get inspiration from?
So and this is one of the things I actually think, coming from a non-financial services background, has actually been something that has actually really benefited me. And I actively also look in terms of bringing huge amounts of diversity of thought into the teams that I lead. So, and I'll be really blunt, everything inspires me. It's horrible to say, but whether it's playing with my kids and seeing the way my children see the world. I made the joke, I was talking, my daughter was basically interrupting me continuously, like she always does when I'm on one of these calls. So let's just give it a while. She sees the world in a very different way. And her idea of seeing the world isn't seeing the process, it's seeing the destination. And that basically, a lot of the time makes me think, her inbuilt approach to always looking at where do I need to get to the end, sometimes is needed in organizations because we think of the process and not the destination. And designing from the destination backwards, that gives me inspiration. So just being able some of the time to ask, when will somebody be happy after they've done this? Or even being able to ask, when I go somewhere with her and she says, Papa, did you really enjoy that? And I ask the same thing about how the services that we have and the services that can do, how do we delight? That gives me inspiration. I look at associated industries like the telecoms industry I was in previously, and I see the transformation that's gone in the telecoms industry. I started working for a company whose CEO at one stage said, we're not going to buy a mobile phone license because it will disrupt our payphone business. That company doesn't exist anymore, rightly so. But it's a real lesson. Disruption comes in many forms, but not thinking about the customer, that for me is the ultimate sin. So the inspiration for me is everywhere. And I try to be as widely read as possible. I try to interact with as many people as possible. I try to bring as much diversity into the team as possible. I try to encourage as much challenge as possible. One thing I'll say is if you come to my team meetings, they're not very quiet. Everybody's got an opinion, sometimes even more than one, sometimes many, and none of them stop until they've had a chance to get it off their chest. And by God help you, they are going to get it off their chest. But it's great. The end product is always better.
Thank you for that. You definitely inspired me. Thank you.
I love it. Thank you, Melissa, for that question. That was a fantastic question. So thank you so much.
And that's why I'm BNY Mellon proud.
I love it. So my question was a little bit on a different approach. You talked about these different approaches that BNY Mellon has into digital transformation. I imagine it's not always smooth sailing, and so I wanted to ask a little bit and dig a little bit deeper into challenges you have faced throughout this journey, because it's never a direct approach. There's always some zigzagging that comes along the way.
I kind of have organizations by their very nature, it depends on what kind of organization you try to grow. So there's a great talk by our CEO and Satya Nadella, who's the CEO of Microsoft, where they talked about how they create organizations that continuously learn. Now, one of my personal favorite quotes is a quote that's attributed to Nelson Mandela, and I don't know if it's true or not, but it wasn't his autobiography, so I don't know if it's true or not, but it's frequently attributed to him. And the saying is, I never lose. I either win or I learn. And I love that. He never sees it as losing. He either wins or he learns. And I think if you create an organization that always looks to learn, then you're always on the up. So one of the things I kind of look at the company is we are well on the way, and we've been practicing being a continuously learning organization. Now, the real secret is you've got to make use of that learning. So our ability to pivot, our ability to actually take the learning and apply it, that for me is the differentiator. So it's not the speed bump that worries me. The speed bump will happen. I can't control there being a speed bump. I can't control, I'll give you an example. As a company, we were able to pivot 95% of our entire global workforce, 50,000 people, to work from home in less than 14 days. In less than 14 days. And if you think about it, how many laptops is that? How many people building laptops? How many DHL things to deliver to? We operate in 35 countries. How do you just take this massive thing and just go whoosh and get everybody working from home? Now, if you'd asked before, I would have said, no, it's not possible. If you ask pre-corona, we're going to conduct this experiment where we're going to get 95% of everybody to work from home, for the next 8 months. Let's go do this. I would have looked at you and said, what you're smoking is illegal in many states. So stop. Yeah. But clearly the technology leadership in the company was able to do that. So my feeling is we've been able to do that by virtue of being an organization that continuously looks to learn, and worry less about the speed bumps and worry more about making sure that we're taking the learning and translating it into something that's really actionable. So I think maybe what I can do is I can share some of the learnings that we have, because they're what we pay the most amount of attention to. So one of the learnings that we've had, and I'm going to use my group as an example. I'm really privileged, and every day I kind of look at it, I'm really privileged to work with a group of people who are literally world-class in what they do. And I always look at the teams to say, if I end up in a room where I'm the dumbest person in the room, then I'm actually in the right room. And when I look at my staff and I look at the teams, they are smart, like really, really smart at what they do. And they spend, my job half the time is just cleaning the road in front of them so that, they can do the magic that they do. And that's kind of, and if I look at how they've managed, the learning that they've managed to look at in terms of how do they sustain relationships when physical interaction isn't what it used to be? How do they basically establish and nurture new relationships? How do they leverage the collaboration tools to be still as effective from home as they were when they were in? How do they basically look at previously maybe work-life balance and looking at what is the optimal work-life integration for them? Because the very nature of it is, the space is different. There's an amazing blog article written by one of my colleagues, which kind of really brought it home to me in terms of his own learning. And he said, at the start of the pandemic, his biggest challenge was he's on call and he was forever telling his children, shh, 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 and telling them to be quiet. And he realized that was actually the wrong thing. Home is their place of safety. Home is not the place they should be quiet and walk on eggshells because he was on the phone. Home is the place where they should. So he said, I went the other way around and I fully embraced him into what we did. How do I move calls with the various people within the organization so that I can schedule my calls around my ability to interact with them, my ability to help them with the Zoom school and so on, but still be as productive as I was before? And I think that for us has been kind of the real learning in terms of really enabling our people to use the tooling, use the collaboration tools, use all of the capabilities we deliver to be great, but still cognizant of the fact that the world isn't what it was when they were, previously in the office. But that blog post kind of, because I kind of saw it in myself, I'm telling my kids, and I have two very young ones that would come screaming into the room, mouthing off very inappropriate things or throwing things at each other. It's like WWF and you're in the middle, but you know what? This is their home.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think everyone's had, had to manage through that, right? And live through that and work through that and adapt through that. And everyone's had to kind of recalibrate in a sense to this new normal. And so no, I like what you mentioned about, you're moving forward or you're learning, and every challenge is an opportunity to learn and for growth. So
you never lose. You never lose. Now the secret is making sure the lesson sticks.
Right.
Fabulous Mrs. Brown reminds me very frequently when I forget to have done the thing I said I was going to do, that this time the lesson didn't stick and I got to do it again.
Hi, I have a quick question.
Sure, Jason.
Yes, Jason.
Hi, Hans. Jason Ruiz, as you can see, from a small little bank called JP Morgan Chase.
Nearly as old as us.
Nearly. But we don't have Hamilton, but we won't get into that. The question I have is, human beings in general, we become calloused to situations. And so where I'm going with this is, in the beginning of this pandemic, everybody became very empathetic to people's home lives, to the changes and shifts of how they had to work. And the shift that I'm now more concerned about is, how do we keep that empathetic state of mind continuing while there's still projects to deliver, while there's still things going on, and not become calloused as we are normally natured to do?
That, Jason's actually, it's a brilliant point. And I'll kind of maybe share a personal perspective on this. I actually think, in a way, the pandemic has been a leveler. Mm-hmm. The downside is not everybody's experience of the pandemic has been the same. So I kind of think, you're in a house, let's say you're in a tiny apartment with 3 kids that aren't going to school, that need to be homeschooled, that are chewing up the same bandwidth you need in order to be able to do your calls while they do. Your experience is going to be very different from, I'm living alone, or there's me and my partner in a nice swanky pad. Everything gets home delivered. This is great. I'm actually loving this versus finding this. So I think everybody's experience of it is different. And I think what has happened, though, is the pandemic has leveled because it has forced everybody back home. So the connections that we used to have to make, which were geographically dependent, are no longer the case. I kind of think the feedback I've had from lots of my colleagues, lots of the kind of teams, the reach out to lots of geographies has become way greater than it was previously. And I think that is systemic across all my peers in the industry. The other part is, I think it's incumbent on us, because I do agree with you. There will be a section that will suddenly say, okay, fine, you've been doing this for 9 months, you should figure it out by now. But there's no mythical they, it is us. And I think every action each one of us here does to basically show that empathy, show that at some point, if there's enough us's, that mysterious they, there will be enough of them. And but I'm really kind of really big on, how do we all do it? And how do we create environments that make other people do it? So, it's that whole net promoter effect. If you do it and you make 10 people do it, and they make another 10, at some point, the mythical they is going to be they're going to be the small minority, and So I take what used to happen, and in the UK, this became a real thing. So in the UK, for a long time, there's a real problem with drink driving. People jump into a car, have to get into a bar, get really drunk, and then basically hurt people. And in the space of 5 years, society decided it wasn't acceptable human behavior to do that. And it wasn't enforcement. It's just as a society, each individual said, you know what, we can't keep killing people on the roads. Let's stop. And everybody made that little, and then it became, unacceptable. So you'd go to a bar, and at the start of the evening, you and your friends would decide who was driving everybody home. And it became acceptable to be the person who was driving everybody home. And it became acceptable to have that conversation up front, as opposed to not, which was the case before. So I kind of think it will happen. There will be a blurring of that, empathy and the lack of due care and attention. But we all have it within us to basically mitigate that by doing the very things that we're all talking to, making sure that you remember this is somebody's life at the end of the day.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, and I'm going to quote Michael Jackson, the late great Michael Jackson, I'm starting with the man in the mirror.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Every single, and here's the thing, I do it with my teams. My teams remind me, we check in. But it's more than just, I kind of call it, you have the cursory check-in, which is, hey, is everybody fine? That's it. No, we make time. Now, it means we don't do it as frequently, but when we do it properly. Versus we do it frequently and gloss over it. It's the whole thing. If you're going to do something, do it well, do it properly.
Yes.
But that's sustaining that relationship. I know most of my colleagues, their kids, my kids come into the thing. I've accepted, and I've been very frank, team, my kids will run into the middle of this thing. My son will sometimes come screaming in and throwing things because, you know what, he's in his zone. And that's life. And I expect them to be as empathetic to the other. So it's that whole thing, if we do it, we make an example for other people to do it, and it'll basically propagate.
Hans, Eric Valdez, I have a question, if I may.
I see you're a Jets fan, Eric. Just subtle hint in the background there.
You have to start now. You have to go there now. We're getting close to...
I'm not from here, so I can't tell. I just saw Jets. That's all I'm saying.
No, fair enough. I work for a firm called BJSS. It's a UK headquartered firm. Your accent sounds Leeds. Are you in the north?
Liverpool.
Liverpool. Okay, fair enough. I'm still getting
greatest
used to all
football team on the planet. For those of you who don't know, greatest football team on the planet.
It's better than the Jets, that's for sure. I agree with you there. On getting back to the digital transformation aspect of it, a lot of people feel digital transformation is means to an end from a new products or services that are developed, but in many cases it's cultural in terms of mindsets and things of nature. Can you expand a little bit about how yourself and BNY Mellon changed, almost created a digital culture in order to produce a digital transformation that yielded services and products?
So, and I saw a cartoon somewhere at the start of this saying, this pandemic has actually enabled adoption greater than anything else, because it just appended the traditional, what used to be traditional. So the bit I kind of look at is, as individuals, we desire digital services in our lives. We all basically run our lives on our mobile phones. I know I do. And I think what has also happened is the acceptance of digital tooling has actually increased during the pandemic. So the mechanisms, I always make the thing, and this, I don't know if it's the same for you, but I talk more to my friends and colleagues than I did before the pandemic over video call. Before, I used to send a random text, or we used to do lots of SMSs in the hope would collide in person at some stage later. Now that we're all not going out and everything is, I'm actually taking the time to consciously connect to them over a variety of platforms. And I make the joke, just look at your own PC and see how many collaboration and video platforms you've got. You've got Zoom, you've got WebEx, you've got Teams, you've got Skype, you've got WhatsApp video, you've got FaceTime, so I wanted to put it into two contexts. One is the appetite for the consumption has increased, which basically means adoption, the barriers to adoption and the barriers to adoption come down. Once you basically transition to a channel that basically allows for it, you open the eyes of the organization to the art of the possible. And that is the real key. Once you get people to be able to understand the art of the possible, the rest of it becomes easier to bridge. And people want to do the right thing. People want to basically advance. People want to try the new, but they just need the environment that creates a psychological safety for them to be able to do that. So I kind of think clients that are transitioning from maybe sending faxes to using digital channels and then seeing the benefits of it. Operations teams that are basically augmenting the things that they do with AI and advanced ML, they see the benefits of it. And you say, it just makes that adoption barrier that much easier, because the biggest challenge in any digital transformation is actually not the creation of the digital service, but it's the adoption of the digital service, because the adoption represents something new. Now, the way people strive and take new things is you need to create a psychological safety around the trying of that new thing that allows it to be an easier journey.
And that psychological safety, you're talking about obviously empowering people so they're not afraid to be risk takers in order to, let alone the adoption aspect of it, like even to take that first baby step, right?
Correct. And it's you know, the way I'll tell you, I look at AI and ML and automation. If we do it right, you augment everybody. It's not a replacement thing. It's an augmentation thing. It just says, you know what, I can be that much faster. And you know what, I can handle this much more data than I could ever do. And I have greater certainty that this is probably the right way to go than I did previously. That gives me the confidence to be awesome.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
No worries. Maria, I see your hand up.
Yes. Hi, how are you?
Hello,
fine, everybody. Thank you so much for this activity. Just as I am ex BNY Mellon proud.
Come back, we'll have you back.
I moved 1 year ago. I love BNY Mellon. I love New York, and I miss New York, and I hope everybody's doing well in New York. Just as a fun fact, the first company offered on the New York Stock Exchange was BNY Mellon.
Of course.
So I know a little bit about BNY Mellon, and the question is, I think it's simple but a little bit complex. BNY Mellon has tons of processes, has tons of applications, around 3,000 applications. Do you get or don't you get overwhelmed with so many processes that you want to normalize?
So, and I'm going to actually answer this. You'll laugh at it. My first job I talked about was in the aerospace industry. And I tell you, the aerospace industry has a process and at least a 50,000 page manual for everything. You know, if you read the manual for how to open the door on an aircraft, you'll understand. Just, you know, there's a manual for how do you open the door on the aircraft. That manual goes through change control, that links back to every part, to every rivet. It's just, so I'm going to basically park, the processes themselves for me aren't the problem. The bit that I started off with is when you look at what is the outcome that the client, whether it's internal or external, wants to get to, and you design from that point backwards, that makes it a lot easier, because then along the way you find out what in the sequence of things I'm doing helps get to that point, what in the sequence of those things detracts from it. And so the other part, as to getting overwhelmed, I kind of think what you actually see, and this is very common in lots of tech companies, is there's actually not a reduction in the number of things. There's actually a decomposing of applications into discrete services. And we're on a similar journey ourselves. So basically it looks at how do I decompose something so that I'm doing it once. So let's say I have an application that ingests data, processes it, does recon, and spits it out. How do I create a single function that it doesn't matter what application, it just does data ingestion, and everybody calls that? How do I basically create a recon componentry that basically doesn't matter what you're doing, everybody calls that? So that re-architecturing from business perspective and an outcome perspective is something that is part of that digital transformation. And the whole idea is you've got to be able to express the entirety of the services that you're looking at, both in terms of a business architecture, a technology application architecture, as well as the outcomes that need to happen at each of those stages, and design the interfaces so that they can all kind of join and talk to each other. Now, that's not easy. And I make, the bit that gets me is everybody looks at these Silicon Valley firms, Google, Facebook, and so on. And if you think they have legacy problems, I was talking to one of the heads of, he was like, look, you can't, I have legacy. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, we're a 20, 30-year-old company now. And it made me think, if you kind of think about it, the so-called new, they're 20, 30 years old. And they made decisions that they're now basically living with. So I kind of think the whole, the way at least we're approaching it is designing from an outcome, moving the company to a product-centric company that basically looks at how do we get, how would we make this a product-centric company first? And then designing everything with the client at the center, and the outcome the client desires the center. That's what's driving the transformation. And if you measure everything in that light, you soon get to find what's useful and what's not.
So, hi, Hans. I would like to circle back a little bit the question from Eric before, because I think it's very important. when we think of digital transformation, we might think of outcomes of a new technology or streamlining processes and all this variety of dimensions that you have spoke about. Ultimately, the engine that makes everything happen is the people behind the effort, and how having an open mindset and having the ability to continuously learn, but also the ability to readapt. I was wondering, how do you address that in your team? How you hire, how you identify talent that has skills that are fungible, and people who, despite having the ability to specialize in one particular area, still have the open-mindedness to be able to try and take new risks and adapt as we go along, because digital transformation is really an ongoing process that never ends.
Absolutely.
How do you approach that?
So the hiring process within the teams is, I'm going to say brutal is the wrong word. It's thorough. The thing that I seek for constantly in all my teams are people who are intellectually curious, like just are curious to the point of distraction, you know, always, and don't necessarily need to come from our industry. So one of, you know, I actually, and it's really, this is one of my most painful ones. We lost I managed to hire a gentleman that very young man, super smart, but I mean, like ridiculously smart and curious to the point of distraction. At the age of 27, he was on his second PhD. You know, he'd got the first one in the bag and he was on his second one. And the guy was just curious about everything. You know, 1 minute he's reading, 1 minute we're talking about psychology. The next minute he's looking at what is the human computer interface for his algorithms, just curious about everything. In the end, the guy actually, in the end I lost him to, I think it was either Amazon or Tesla, no, Amazon. They flew out to Singapore to hire him. And they actually hired him and his wife at the same time to basically rub it in my face to say, look, you know, we'll hire both of them just to get, you know. But the bit is that intellectual curiosity is step one in the process. So partly what we're looking for is how curious are you? Then the other one is how open are you to being wrong? And how do you learn? So we ask questions such as, how do you learn? Or even more importantly, what's the most ridiculous thing? What's the most ridiculous foundational assumption you've had that was broken? And if the answer is none, then you actually probably aren't open enough. So that process kind of, in effect, really weeds out. And the second piece is everybody has a say in terms of where do you want to get to and how do you look at enabling success in other people? Or how do you teach other people what you know? Because if you're really smart, you also have an ability to share your knowledge. It's, you know, if you're smart, it's incumbent upon you to share what you know. So that kind of, in effect, is our kind of two guiding principles. How do you learn and how do you share what you learn? Because the assumption is the basic skills, can you write code? Can you do product design? Can you do all of the, you know, whatever the role is, by virtue against the interview, you probably got that. Yeah. The next piece is how do we look at fit in terms of how you look to elevate everybody within the group? Now, the real secret comes to keeping them. Now, I feel really kind of lucky, you know, our attrition rates, especially within our group, you know, I kind of atrophy around 2%, 1 to 2% a year. And the reason is we give people really difficult problems to solve, like really difficult, you know, the kind of stuff that scratches your head and keeps you awake at night and annoys everybody because you just can't get it out. You know, it's like that catchy tune that's stuck in your head and you can't get it out. That kind of problem. We try and give people as many of those as we can, because that's what you give smart people. You give them really difficult existential problems to solve. Yeah, so one of the programs that one of the teams was working on is how do you translate the concept of fairness into math so that you can encode it in an AI algorithm? Who's to say what's fair? But you know what? Translate that into math and then write that into code.
We'll call that a tough problem.
And you can see, and I tell you, it's really funny. We've queued them up. So after fairness, we're doing ethics. And after ethics, we're doing accountability. And after accountability, we're doing transparency. I've kind of queued them all up. So once they come to this one, the next one's, you know, it's just, Give people hard problems.
Yeah.
And in addition to what they do normally, everybody wants to have a sense of achievement that you look back and say, you know what, I did this. I made this with my bare hands. This thing tortured me to within an inch of my sanity, but you know what, I cracked it. That's why, that's kind of how we look at the talent problem. But it's hard. Great talent has lots of ability, but keeping it means you keep it engaged. You keep that talent engaged. Hopefully I answered your question. And if you know how to do that in math, I have an opening.
Thank you, Jorge. Appreciate it. I think I have a hand raise here from Gilda Alvarez. Gilda, are you on? If you're speaking, you're on mute.
Mute button will kill you.
Hi. Hello, how are you?
Hi.
How you doing? This is a very interesting subject for me from an infrastructure point of view. I've been in the infrastructure for the last 20 years, and I've seen the industry move in different ways. And what personally I think what it has been doing is consolidating the job to a one person, what used to be a network administrator, a storage administrator, a developer, a DBA, into one person. So when you start looking for the opportunities, they want you to have so many skills in order to go into this new digital transformation world without the pay. So that's the next question. And the reason why I believe we're seeing talent bleed is that people are skilling up, are learning multiple cloud technologies, multiple infrastructure, and there's people out there that are willing to pay that much money for those people to be part of their team. And we're forgetting that as we consolidate all these jobs into one person to handle a whole infrastructure, that person also needs to be valued for the amount of skills that has learned in order to continue to be with this company that you want us to be. So I think a lot of things needs to be restructured from a compensation point of view. We can have a network admin that can be a network admin for Cisco for the rest of his life and probably, it be for the next 20 years. No, Cisco's not going anywhere. Or you can have a cloud engineer that knows how to work with AWS as well as Azure and be able to provide you the support that you need as a hybrid environment that you support. So, but we also have to look at the compensation as part of the whole digital transformation process.
So I would kind of respond to that in a slightly different way. So I kind of think with every lurch a society moves through its transformation cycles, there's a need that I think we talked about right at the start in terms of how do you create a level of relevancy in terms of the skills, and then you are ready for that new future. And I'm going to use, and it's really fun, I'm going to use my dad as an example in this particular respect. My dad loathed using any form of digital communication. He would pick up the phone. He would never video call. He would never do any of these things. Corona strikes. He's in England and he misses his grandchildren, like really misses them. And there's an embargo between moving from the UK to the States. Now I can't get him off Zoom, like literally can't get him off Zoom. He's discovered ways in terms of how he integrates this within his life and so on. So I kind of hear you. And I think there's an element of we needing, as we go through the various transformative cycles, in terms of how do we maintain our relevance to where the demand is. Because I don't think it's ever going to be enough to say, just because I'm ready with something, somebody else desires that skill. So, one of the things I was kind of thinking about is, in all of the transformation that we have, why do I not have, I have self-driving cars. Why do I not have self-driving databases? Why do I not have self-driving infrastructure that never ever needs me? Why do I not have auto-coding applications or self-repairing applications? Why do I not have networks that basically, there could be a variety of things, but I think as the capabilities increase and as the tools that we have increase, I think what's more important for us is that thirst for how do we basically maintain our relevance in line with the transformation that's happening, so that there will always be a consumer for what it is that we're able to offer. So I started off when I go into a room with a huge chunk, you know, I make no bones about it. I know I'm not the smartest person in the room. And in fact, that's my litmus test. If I'm the smartest person in the room, you know what? We're in trouble. Because I can only be smart in this thing. There has to be somebody who's way smarter than me in lots of all these other things. And that collective horsepower, that's what kind of will advance us. And so when I talk to some of my engineers, or one of my engineers, and it's really funny, I was talking to one of the engineers just before we had this call. And we were talking about, and this was our check-in, I was asking him how he is, and he's like, you know what, I'm struggling to sleep. And I was like, why, are you working too hard? He goes, no, I'm reading this blog on AI and it's driving me crazy. And like literally, I said, what do you mean? He goes, I'm up till 2 a.m. I'm reading this blog on AI and I feel like I'm not there because, you know, these people are doing this wonderful thing with it and I can only do this. What? And literally, the person was having a fit over something that he could see the world was moving and he was saying, I'm not there and I need your help in order to get me there. And I'm thinking, okay, this is great. If you're looking at an AI engine to basically plot, you know, he was reading some of the AI that lived in the Dragon capsule that took, you know, that Elon Musk basically. I was thinking, we're not quite doing that, but I see why you want to know how to do this. And how do I help you get to that point? But that's for me. So I hear you, but I think the nature of what we do means our relevance and the product we offer, that's what determines where we're going to end up. And it's just incumbent upon all of us to basically get into a place that allows us to continuously learn in order to maintain that relevance. Because I think without that, we're going to get stuck. I really believe that.
Heinz, isn't this also a question of like, you know, that's where you're trying to adapt. And from an infrastructure perspective, you go from Cisco engineering to like infrastructure as a service. And how can you be portable in that context, still be in the same industry, but then be relevant, adaptable in the new digital era?
Absolutely. I used to remember when I worked in a telecoms company, one of my best partners was Nokia. And you never went wrong. A Nokia phone was never going to go wrong until Steve Jobs proved a Nokia phone can go wrong. You know, before Steve Jobs, if you kind of think about it, just at its basis point, every advert for a mobile phone pushed battery life. I had a Nokia phone that lasted a week on a single charge. 1 week. It weighed a brick. It weighed as much as a brick and it lasted a week. And if somebody came to rob me, I could use the brick as an offensive weapon, as the phone as an offensive weapon to stop. Steve Jobs came in and sold me a phone that lasted an hour, but allowed me to do this. And I preferred it. So up until that point, Nokia was it. And overnight, that thing disappeared. So I kind of think that adaptability, that's where we need to kind of get to, because nothing in human progress is certain or constant. We will just continue to accelerate. And our ability to learn and adapt, I look at this batch of young people who are going through virtual schooling. They're going to be much better at sustaining virtual relationships in the future than I am ever going to be. Because they've been tempered by it. They've learned this way. They've interacted this way. They've done classes this way. They've done play dates and birthdays and all of these things this way. Even if things go back to normal, they're going to be able to adapt and use this digital medium way better than they would have been able to if they hadn't gone through it. So maybe their ability to consume virtual learning is going to be exponentially greater than my mine because they've done it. So it's just, I mean, it's not quite a satisfying answer, I know, but it's just something to think about.
But this adaptability is something that is not in everybody. So you have people that are very easily adapting to your AWS, your Azure, your Google, and then you have them leaving companies because now they're worth twice what they were worth before because of the way. So the new value of the technical person in the future is going to be the adaptability, and adaptability is going to be equals to compensation.
That may well truly be the case. Or maybe it's, if we kind of substitute adaptability with ability to learn, then that may be, irrespective of whether it's infrastructure or anything else, that may be what drives it.
I have a lot of friends that are still Linux admins, I mean, Solaris admins that do not want to learn Linux, that do not want to learn Windows. And unfortunately, they're suffering the consequences of what is happening in the digital transformation with these things. But yeah, you have other people that are willing to put the time and get certified in different cloud solutions, and that's it pays off. I tell you that.
Yeah.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, and I would say that the pandemic has exacerbated this significantly, which is, to quote the late great Bruce Lee, to be like water.
That's it.
And that it's illustrated in every story that you've conveyed, is that people have had to shift, they've had to pivot, they've had to adjust, and they've had to make the best of every situation. That could be working 4 hours, taking care of your kids for 2 hours and working an additional 4 hours in your workday. It could be shifting in the priorities you have at home versus work. It could be just shifting your focus. But regardless of what it is, this pandemic has forced us all to react and be adaptable. Case in point, with, like, to quote with, excuse me, to reiterate your story with your father, who is using Zoom. And there's a number of people who were zero experience in technology, and they've learned, they've adapted because there's a need for it, and that need needs to be met. So, I mean, for me, what I'm taking from this is all about being adaptable, being amendable, and making sure that you're seeing where the trends are going, so that you make sure that when you are adapting, you're at least following suit of where the trends are going, and you're not trying to catch up.
Absolutely.
And you know, Jason, this is Jose and Hans. I love your presentation. And to Jason's points, yes, it's we have to adapt. COVID it's pushing us to do it faster. But in going back to the learning, we will go to the office. We will learn from people who does the same thing that we do every day. We share the meeting room, we share the topics, we listen to the same conversation, we are in the same programs or projects. Now we are learning from our own families members. No? To your point, it's like you're learning that you have to respect your kids' space. You have to understand the world that they live in. And you know, something that at least I discover is, and Hans, you mentioned this, is my kids are learning in a different way. No, I used to ask everything to my dad because he was my hero. He was my source of information. My kids will come to me just after they have searched for an answer on the web multiple times before coming to me, just to validate if the source of information on the web it's trustworthy. Because that was my advice to them, is like, I know you are not going to ask me, just be sure that the source of information is trustworthy. So you learn that, you adapt yourself. You have to understand that new generations, people that you're going to be working for or with in the future, it's coming from that mindset. And you have to force yourself to understand that. Otherwise, you're gonna get stuck, right? If you don't recognize it. And I'm not saying that we have to you have to change your role or your work or the company that you work for, but you have to put attention to these things. And to Jason's point, COVID is just exposing faster this situation that anyway it was happening, but it was just going into a slower pace.
Yeah, and I kind of look, one of the conversations we've had recently, and I come from a very environmentally minded house. I'm very proud of the fact I'm married to a very militant French feminist, like very militant French feminist. I use those words in the right order. And my daughter, who is 9 years old, is also very militantly feminist. And my son and I are holding the fort. We're the only two guys in the house, but we're clearly outnumbered, maybe about 20-1, because the French part accounts for a lot. And one of the things that to the point is their approach in terms of how they are seeing the world. I kind of think COVID has exacerbated and created an environment where people are asking questions. So, my children ask, how did this virus happen? That level of curiosity, let's say that's multiplied across lots of other houses. Suddenly, the world we live in, how we are good custodians of the planet we're on, what kind of environment we leave, they are suddenly becoming questions that are up for discussion in a way that they may have not been up for discussion before. Because young children are asking those questions, and adults are having to engage with them to actually critically also answer those questions. How did this virus happen? And it's never happened before. What happened? And just a simple question like that opens up 1,000 possibilities. So in a way, not that it's a good thing, but it's just the conditions happened, and it's how we react as a society to it, I think, is just as important as the fact that it's happening in the first place.
Thank you, Hans. Appreciate that. Wow, I think this group really made my job really easy this time around. I think I asked 1 or 2 questions, so this was fantastic.
Well, this is Jose. I want to make a last comment here. I'm sorry that I try to break in, but everybody's talking. I've been around this industry for a while. What happens is whatever technology you're an expert on today is going to be either commoditized or it's going to be automated. So you need to look for the next technology. Where is it going? I remember writing assembler in an IBM mainframe in CICS, and yeah, there are some jobs for dinosaurs like me out there, but there are not that many, and they're not paying what they pay for some of the top new technologies. So you have to be on the lookout. And that's what's happening in the infrastructure world, because using AI and other computer tools, you're going to automate as much as you can to simplify the whole process and be able to build on top of that bigger things. And thanks a lot, Hans. Good, very good presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hans. Really appreciate this. Like I said, you all were super engaging and really made this role easy for me today. Hans, I'd like to just use this last minute. Any final takeaway you'd like to leave with this group before we close up?
No, and the only thing I'll say is, and I was kind of started up, I'm new here. And every continent that I've lived on with my family has had its own challenges and so on. But the one thing that I'm absolutely enthused about in everywhere that I've kind of lived, everybody wants, I kind of just innately, I believe everybody wants to do the right thing, and everybody wants to succeed, and everybody wants to enable. And I think, at that point, I kind of maybe start off with, there's no mythical they that are stopping us. There's just us. And if we do it, we don't need to worry about that mythical they, because it's just, for me, it's always too easy to worry about the mythical they and not kind of deal with the kind of the real us. So, as you're kind of leading your teams, as you're looking at your own digital transformation journeys and so on and so forth, I kind of always look at, I control the stuff that I can control, which is the us and the me. I try not to worry too much about that mythical they. My boss used to say he's trying to find the email address, the they at bnymellon.com, so that he can email them and tell them to stop. That's kind of the way I kind of look at stuff. So if there's anything that at least I've learned on my journey, that's been it. And I hope, this has been as useful for you. And I've clearly learned a lot from all of you as well. So thank you.
No, this was wonderful. And we definitely have to have you back. So clearly it wasn't enough time, but this was wonderful. And now, officially part of the HITEC family, we're going to help you out with the translation and getting you to South America at some point once those borders open up. So we're here for you now.
That's it. I'm going to find an address, 6 months. That's all I need to finish that collection.
We'll help you out. Well, again, thank you so much, Hans, for being with us and taking the time. Really appreciate it. And thank you, all of you, HITEC community and familia. Thanks for always joining and being part of the conversation. Such a pleasure. Have a fantastic Friday, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.